it's still a little bit too expensive. That's it. Review over. Thanks for watching. Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now I apologise for the silly intro, but that was the only way I could think to summarise this. AMD's RX 590. Big thanks to James over at CCL for providing this card to me. CCL Online here in the UK, of course, are a retailer of all PC based things, components, pre-built desktops. They have a great clearance section as well, which is just ideal for all of us budget conscious PC gamers too. Every so often I like to review something a little more expensive, stuff that I wouldn't usually take a look at, just to sort of change things up a bit, and today it's the turn of the RX 590 itself. Now, launching late last year at a price of around £280 here in the UK, I thought it was a little bit too expensive, but since Nvidia have launched their RTX 2060, that sort of had a knock-on effect on pricing, not just of other Team Green cards, but of AMD offerings as well. And the RX 590 certainly hasn't escaped that. These days you can pick one up for about £250 or $260. That was the best price I saw over in the States on Newegg. Thing is, I think it still costs a little bit too much, but we'll get into the advantages and disadvantages of RX 590 ownership a little later on, because first, let's run a few benchmarks. So to give you a better idea of comparison, throughout my gameplay tests here, I've compared the RX 590 with an RX 580 as well as a 6GB GTX 1060 as well, to give you a better idea of how these compare when running some of the latest and greatest games. I started off with Assassin's Creed Odyssey because this will run completely unexpected on certain hardware. It's not very well optimized, and with my Ryzen 5 system here paired with 8GB of 3000 MHz DDR4 RAM, we were seeing very respectable frame rates across all of our GPUs, but of course the main focus is the RX 590 here and how well it handles itself at 1080p. Here we were running with the very high settings and a few high settings thrown in as well, just to increase performance in certain game areas. Now, I'm very happy with the Battlefield 5 performance across a wide array of cards that I've tested. This seems to run very well on all sorts of different hardware, and the RX 590 is no exception, averaging 90 frames per second using the high preset. In fact, I threw a couple of ultra settings in here as well, just to make things look a little better though. I still stand by my statement that I believe Battlefield 1 looked a little bit more graphically impressive. Battlefield 5, however, averaged 90 frames per second, with 1% lows of 74 and 64 respectively, using the RX 590 GPU. Another very respectable result, and one that you'll have no problems with here. Now, in Far Cry 5 we set the preset to Ultra and enabled the HD textures too, to see an average frame rate on the RX 590 of 70 FPS. Again, you can see how this compares to other cards in similar price categories, and when you consider that the GTX 1070 can be found at a similar price in some areas, like here in the UK, I can't help but feel that perhaps I should have thrown the result of that in too, but without a doubt that would outperform the 590 across the board, just in case any of you were wondering. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is probably the newest release on today's benchmark tests, but here it ran flawlessly with the highest settings and 67 frames per second on average. In fact, the only bad thing about this video is my gameplay performance, as it always is, but the RX 590 will hold up very well and remained very quiet during operation, which is always a bonus. Just Cause 4 is probably the most demanding of today's games and runs with 60 frames per second, using a mixture of high and very high settings. There was a little bit more stutter here, but nothing too significant, and as you make your way across the huge open world map, performance will differ depending on where you are, but here I have to say it held up pretty well using this 8GB card, but why wouldn't it? I mean, this is still quite an expensive purchase, and that doesn't matter what card you decide to compare it to. Finally, it's a slightly older release, but The Witcher 3 has been giving systems a hard time since it came out a few years ago. Here with the 590 and the Ultra settings in both the post-processing and graphical menus, we saw 67 frames per second on average. But all in all, we've seen pretty decent results here throughout. And the 590 certainly holds its own. So, why might you want to purchase the RX 590? Well, it's one of the best 1080p 60fps cards on the market right now. I say one of with good reason. That may all change when Nvidia release their upcoming and still rumoured, I believe, at the time of this video, GTX 1660, intended to compete with this at a very similar price point. You're also getting a card that can handle pretty much every modern game out there with respectable settings and frame rates too. What makes it a little bit more attractive is the fact that it comes bundled with 3 games. I'm not sure how long this deal is going to last, but if you purchase it right now, you're going to get Resident Evil 2, the remastered or remade version, whatever you want to call it, Devil May Cry 5 and Tom Clancy's Division 2. I don't think Devil May Cry and The Division are out just yet, but when they are, you'll get the codes for them. When you think of it like that, say those games have a value of £80 or dollars after you've managed to sell them, then you're paying about £160, £170 for the RX 590, which makes it a little bit more attractive then. But let's move on to the disadvantages, because I think there are slightly more than there are advantages. First of all is the pricing. I've mentioned it before and I'm going to mention it again. It's still a bit too expensive. At £250, $260, it seems quite unattractive in comparison to, say, a brand new RX 580 or 1060. Both of those perform a little bit worse. This sits between the 1060 and the 1070, but for the money you can save, for example, you can pick up an RX 580 for around 200. You could probably overclock that and get more performance from it, therefore closing the gap between that and this 590 right here. The 1060 is also a good option, and right now the prices for those are pretty fantastic, brand new as well. The 6GB version, of course, retails for around £200 or dollars, the same as the RX 580. And if it were me, I would strongly consider one of those as well if you're in the market for a brand new GPU. There's also the fact that thanks to Nvidia's recent RTX 2060 launch, the price of the GTX 1070 has dropped. For example, this one I found in the UK at about £270 really isn't much more than the retail price for this RX 590, so that may seem like the more attractive option. I know what one I would go for, put it that way, and I'm not just saying that because I use a 1070 in my system on a daily basis. It all comes down to pricing. Whatever this card costs in your respective country is going to affect the outcome of your decision. If the 580 and the 590 are priced very closely where you live, the 590 would be the one to go for, especially if you don't have a very good used market. I can only speak, of course, for where I live, and here in the UK, I would spend the £20 or £30 more and get a 1070, or save £40 or £50 the other way and opt for an RX 580 or 1060. These aren't even going to be used cards, they're going to be brand new because the current pricing is really rather good. There's also the fact that we're going to have to wait and see how Nvidia's rumoured and upcoming 1660 GTX card will fit into all of this. I believe it's intended to compete with the 590 at a similar price point, so we're going to have to see how those benchmarks turn out as well, and maybe then this card will seem a little more attractive because I imagine AMD may consider dropping the price yet again. If this RX 590 cost $200 or pounds, I think then it would be a no-brainer at that price point because it would outperform the 580 and 1060 at an identical price. But where it currently sits at that awkward £250 margin, it's still just a little tiny bit too much. AMD, if you're listening, please drop the card's price. It would be very attractive then to a lot of people looking for a brand new 1080p 60fps card. I don't want to bash it too much because it is still a very good performer. It will run every game out there and it won't have any problems in doing so with even the high or ultra presets selected, as you saw from my earlier benchmarks. I also think it looks fantastic, as I mentioned before. See, you're not going to get many cards that look like this, and it certainly isn't going to appeal to everyone, but I think it's absolutely fantastic in the way it looks. To conclude, I like it. I don't want to bash this card. I really enjoyed my time with it, and I think if you're looking for a brand new GPU that will perform very well, this should be considered among your options, though I don't think you should overlook the current pricing on 580s, 1060s and even 1070s, because they may be more attractive than you think in the country in which you live. So just bear all of that in mind. Furthermore, be sure to never forget about the used market, because that is where some incredible bargains lie. The 580 and the 1060 have obviously been out for a while, so you're going to find a lot more deals on those as opposed to the 590, and this may just tempt you one way or another, especially when you see some of these prices. To conclude, if you are going to opt for a 590, the Sapphire Nitro would be my choice. I can't get over that design. I think it looks really cool. Some of you may hate it, but there we go. The 590 then, one of the hardest cards I've had the pleasure of reviewing, because the current GPU pricing market, the competitiveness and all these new releases can really become overwhelming. But I'm going to leave it there before I natter on too much. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like on it. If you didn't, leave a dislike on it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Let me know if you own one of these fantastic beasts in your system. And hopefully, I'll see all of you in the next one. That was different, wasn't it?